Hey everybody, it's Mike over at Taxes and Bricks. Well, happy Monday. Hope everybody had a great weekend. Welcome to episode 26. Today we are continuing our four-part series on filing status. We're at part 3 with married filing jointly, married filing separately. So we're going to give a little bit of information on that. And we'll round out filing status with qualifying widow or widower on Wednesday. But first, if you like this kind of content, hit the like button below, leave a comment. I read all of them and reply to all of them. Also, subscribe. Share our content with your friends. The information and I think in terms of the Lego, people might want to see. So go ahead, do that. Help me out, help the channel out, and help your friends out. So first, take a quick break since this is tax related. Pay the lawyers, throw up a little disclaimer. I'll be right back.
This video is rated TAX and contains occasional ramblings, mild attempts at humor, self-deprecation, irreverence, brief numerical examples, and adult tax and accounting advice that may not be suitable for all taxpayers. Viewer discretion is advised. Before following any of the advice in this or any of our videos, you should always consult with a tax professional. Thank you.
All right, welcome back. So last week we did single, we did head of household. So if you haven't watched those, get the notes from a classmate or just go back and watch them. Today we're going to talk about married. What does it mean? The 2 filing statuses that you can employ if you are married. And then why you might pick one over the other and what happens if you pick one versus the other. So what does married mean? Well, married very simply means on or by the last day of the year, you were married legally and you remained married through the last day of the year. So you got married, say at some point in like February, March of 2021, and you were still married at the end of the day, 11:59 p.m. on the 31st of December, 2021, you're considered married for the entire year. If you went out and you were single all year, and then at like 10 p.m. on 12/31, December 31st, you got married, you're married for the whole year, even though you weren't actually legally married the entirety of the year. Tax code wise, you're married. Okay. Common law marriage is also recognized by the IRS if and only if you are common law married and your common law marriage is recognized as a marriage in the state where you reside or in the state where the common law marriage began. Okay. If you need to know whether or not you're common law married, just check with your state regulations because they're going to differ as to the definition of what common law marriage is, and some states don't recognize common law marriage. Actually, there are very few. But the IRS will say if your state does recognize it where you presently reside, or the state where you actually became common law married recognized it and you don't live there anymore, you can be common law married tax-wise. So, what happens if you're married at the beginning of the year and a spouse passes away? I think we might have mentioned this in one of the other prior videos, but if let's say you start the year and both spouses are alive in January and then middle of the year, let's say the husband passes away and the wife lives on, she may claim married filing jointly or claim herself as married, one of the 2 married statuses, for the entirety of 2021, even though her spouse had passed away. That is permissible, okay? So if you are married, you have 2 options for your filing status and 2 options only. You can file married filing jointly or you can file married filing separately, okay? Those are the 2 options you get. You may decide which you wish to go with up and until the moment you file your tax return. So it isn't like you need to start off in January of 2021 and say, I am declaring that I will be filing jointly when I file my 2021 tax returns, or I will be filing separately. You don't have to do that. If circumstances present themselves throughout the course of 2021 and you sit down in early 2022 like now to file your taxes, you can make that decision while you're preparing your 2021 tax returns right now, okay? and up and until you file. However, a couple of warnings. If you file jointly, that is what you and your spouse choose to do. You may not amend your joint filing after April 15th. Even if you went on extension and then filed your return, say later in the year as jointly in May or June or July, you can't amend them at that point. April 15th, the original filing deadline, April 15th is the last day to make a decision if you filed jointly to fix it. After that, you're stuck with joint, okay? But if you filed separately, you may amend any time after you filed separately, okay, to correct the issue. But I warn my clients and I warn everybody I talk to all the time, there are statutes of limitations to get refund money back. So if you're doing that amendment, you filed separately, but you're like, oh, crud, I realized I could get more money if I filed jointly, okay, then that's okay. But if it's beyond 3 years from the original filing date of your returns, you're not going to get that refund money back, okay? Federal in pretty much all states, okay? So why would somebody file separately? Why would a married couple choose to file separately? Well, the first reason is that when you file separately, there's no joint liability for the tax or the returns. So, easy example, let's say you've got a husband and wife and the husband always owes a ton of money and the wife would usually get a refund back. Well, you could do that, and the wife's refund isn't going to be snatched if she files separately from the husband to pay the husband's liability. Also, I mean, in a case where, you know, maybe one spouse is maybe not as open and frank and honest on their tax return as they should be, and the other spouse doesn't want to be involved in that, or maybe their situation is just very complicated and one spouse may be at a higher risk for scrutiny than the other spouse, they may decide that the spouse that has sort of less quote-unquote risk should be isolated and therefore file separately just to mitigate that risk. So no joint liability of whatever's on the tax return from one spouse to the other if they file separately. Another reason is you might actually save money. Okay, so you sit down, you do your returns, and maybe you've got an accountant or a piece of software that can run the numbers, and they go, well, you know, jointly, your total tax liability between Fed and state is $10,000, but separately it's $8,500. Okay, $1,500 is $1,500. So that's what I would be looking at if I was doing it and deciding whether or not somebody could save money or not. Which goes back to the whole, if that's the case, you could decide after you've prepared your returns jointly, but before you filed them, hey, it works out better to be separate. Let's just separate the returns, okay? Maybe you have an uncooperative spouse, or you might not know where your spouse is. Your spouse may be withholding information from you so you don't feel comfortable or are unable to file a joint tax return, but you yourself want to be compliant with the law, rightly so. So listen, spouse be damned, you file your returns separately, etc., okay? I already talked about head of household involving children. I caution my clients all the time, especially if they come to me and this one spouse isn't doing their taxes here and the other one is, and there are kids involved. There are narrow circumstances, and we talked about this in that household video, where a married couple files separately from one another and one of them would be head of household. Go back and watch last Wednesday's video on head of household for when that happens, okay? Just because we're talking about married filing separate and there's a kid involved, let's say, doesn't mean all of a sudden the one who claims the kids is, boom, head of household, unless you hit a certain very narrow set of circumstances. Go back and watch Wednesday's video. You'll see when that is. It's later on in the video, okay? There's one other reason that I encounter pretty often, and that's income-based student loan repayment. What is that? Well, some people's student loans that they have for college are based, the repayment monthly is based on how much money they show on their tax return annually. So you can imagine in a case like that, the less money you show on your return, the less you may have to pay monthly back on your loan. And whether or not that's a good financial decision or not to stretch out the payments, it may be necessary, okay? Even though it might cost you more interest, you might have a situation where you just can't afford a $1,500 a month payment, but you file with your wife and she makes $250,000 a year and you make 50 grand a year, and you put up your combined AGI on that sheet that the student loan company takes from you, your payments might go through the roof. So even though it might cost you money tax-wise to file separately, financially, from a cash flow standpoint, you may need to file separately from your spouse in order to keep your student loan payments to the point where you can afford them or they're comfortable for you. Okay. Couple of warnings about married filing separately that I try and drive home. If you file separately and your spouse itemized their deductions on their returns separately, you must itemize on yours, whether or not your itemized deductions are higher or lower than the standard deduction. So your spouse is filing separately, they itemize, you have to itemize, period, full stop. Likewise, you're filing separately from your spouse, they take the standard deduction. I don't care what your itemized deductions look like, you got to take the standard too. The only way that you could then itemize in that situation is if your spouse agreed to amend their tax return that they already filed and change to the filing status that you want to do. So if you're going to file separately to the extent that you can, you need to coordinate with your spouse, okay? And assuming that you're filing separately for, say, the joint liability reason, and you're filing separately because it makes sense financially, you should probably be working in conjunction with one another to prepare your returns too, just to make sure that anything joint that you did have is put on the right place, but also to make sure that your filing statuses line up. Okay. Couple of other warnings about married filing separate. Married filing separately comes with less incentive. Okay. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're married filing separately, you can't claim the earned income tax credit, for example. You can't claim a deduction for student loan interest, no matter what your income is. You can't get any of the education credits for yourself or a child that goes off to college. And you have much lower thresholds for being able to contribute to an IRA, Roth, or traditional. Okay? So that's all the long way around to. There are a lot of other things that you can't do when you're married filing separately. Why? Well, because if the IRS is going to give you no joint liability, they're going to potentially be giving you a lower tax, and you might be given the benefit of lesser payments on a student loan and certain other largesse that married filing separate might carry with it. As I've said in prior videos, the government giveth with one hand and they take with nine. Okay, and that's how they work. So they're going to literally kneecap you on certain things in order to give you a benefit for married filing separate. Bottom line in all of this is you're married and you have two options and you're unsure as to which to go with. Talk to somebody. Figure out what's going to be best for you and make sure you make the right decision. Make sure you're not making irrevocable elections. Make sure that you're minding some of these deadlines and these ideas of when you need to do something and when you can't do it. And then make sure that you're coordinating with your spouse to the extent that you can if you are going to end up filing separately, okay? That wraps up Married for today. Again, Wednesday, qualifying widow or widower. Again, feel free to leave a comment or a question below. I read and answer all of them. Subscribe, share our content with your friends. Tomorrow, which is Tuesday, Lego Day. Not quite sure what we're going to do because I'm not quite ready with the architecture series yet. Working on it. I might give you a little sneak peek of it. Might go into some of the Technic cars behind me, which I'm pretty much done with as well. So might just show you those and a couple of changes that I made to the Lego room here. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching episode 36, mother of God, not there yet. 26. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you real soon.